Fairies and vampires, what is the deal there? What is the crossover? I suppose the initial confusion comes from the fact that the most famous vampire story, Dracula, was written by an Irishman, Bram Stoker. So therefore, people think that the vampire comes from Irish folklore. Now, there are blood-sucking supernatural forms in all of the world's traditions, really. So in this case, it's not really true to say that the vampire, though, is an Irish fairy, although Bob Curran, the lecturer from Ulster University, did speculate that Stoker was thinking about the Aurtok, which is a particular Irish fairy being. But I'm not sure whether that's the case or not. But let's have a quick look as to why people might think fairies and vampires do have more in common than is generally thought. So first of all, the victims of vampires tend to be in this strange twilight state. That's very true when it comes to changelings or people taken to the fairy otherworld. They can be here in body and gone in mind, or gone completely. So you have that initial idea of the victims being in this liminal state. Now, the other really interesting thing, of course, is that fairies are said to dwell beneath the ground, and of course vampires are also said to dwell beneath the ground. In the case of fairies, it's mounds, but vampires, it can be lairs or subterranean tunnels beneath buildings and so on. Now, what's also interesting about that is you have this liminal idea of light. Vampires, of course, can't be out in sunlight, and Claude Lecatou, the writer and anthropologist, has also written about how certain fairy beings are stuck in place during the daylight hours, and it's only at night time that they can come out. So there's another parallel there. And of course, the song Hotel California has often been said to be about someone trapped in this other world, which has parallels to both the fairy other world and someone in a vampire's lair. Now, the other thing then, very much connected to that, is this idea of the recently dead, who are often seen in the wild hunt or the fairy parade. And of course, the recently dead are often seen with the main vampire, following the main vampire around. So you have that thing again where they're subservient to this supernatural figure that somehow is keeping them both alive and dead at the same time. And what's also interesting about that is how someone can be rescued from a vampire or rescued from fairies. And again, it's very similar. It's a sanctified object. The most famous in the case of fairies, I suppose, is the story of Robert Kirk, who was taken by the fairies, said to be taken by the fairies, and he came to his nephew in a dream. There are different stories here, but basically he told his nephew that when he sees him in a church, he was to take something from the altar and throw it at Kirk. And if he did, Kirk would be able to get rescued from the fairies. However, the nephew messed it up, and Kirk was left in the fairy otherworld forever. Now, equally, of course, with vampires, you have sanctified objects like holy water or a cross, which can also not only get rid of them, but can also help bring back someone who was taken by the vampires, as long as they're caught in time. So there's some parallels already between fairies and vampires. Between fairies and vampires is the taboo of accepting food or drink, and in the vampire's case, of course, it's blood. And with fairies, it can be anything. It can be an object that's charmed and made to look like bread or water, but in fact it might be something else. But once a person consumes the fairy food, they are stuck in the fairy otherworld. And equally, when someone drinks up the vampire's blood, it's basically a way that they're cementing that bond, and they can't be brought back to being a human again. Now, it's also interesting in Irish lore and in Scottish lore that the fairies themselves use blood. There's a story from the Irish folklore archives where a woman is seen hanging her clothes on the fairy mound, on a hawthorn tree on the fairy mound. And the next day when she goes to get the washing, it's covered in blood and she dies. And she's then seen in the company of fairies at that mound. So you have that liminal state, a person taken, but fairies using blood in order to either poison the woman or to transfer her from the human world to the fairy world. the writer Daniel Forrest actually told me about tales in Scottish lore, or accounts I should say, where the fairy doctor cements the bond between the fairies and themselves by allowing the fairy to drink their blood. So they're sealing the bargain, if you like. So there's another very, very common attribute between a vampire and a fairy. And I suppose you could also say when you have children leaving their teeth underneath their pillow, you've got the fairy coming, and in most cases I'm sure there's blood still left on the tooth. So there's something else to think about. So that's a very quick overview of the common links between fairies and vampires. But as I said, there are blood drinking supernatural forms probably in all of the world's mythologies and lore, so it's not just an Irish thing. Anyway, see you next time for another quick Circle Stories video.